welcome to the Communicating Capital podcast, where finance and communication get a fresh perspective. Hosted by a dynamic team of women in the industry, we're here to redefine the conversation with candid, no-nonsense interviews featuring top executives, communication experts, and industry leaders. So whether you're a seasoned professional or you're just interested in our world, we're here to help you navigate the space in new and exciting ways. Today, I'm so excited to be joined by Jules Abraham. He's the principal of JQA Partners. He's also the managing director over at Core IR with regard to communications. Jules is a strategic and insightful senior level communications professional who's known for his expertise in PR, corporate communications, issues and crisis management, and so much more. Over the years, he's helped guide large and small cap companies through challenges such as FDA approvals, investor relations, public relations, and navigating complex biotech and life sciences narratives. Jules, welcome to Communicating Capital.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to talk to you today.
I'm so excited for you to be here. I know that you have a proven history of success with both large and small cap companies. I've seen the success firsthand. I've heard different testimonials from different companies, different people that you've worked with. Can you tell us a little bit about your background just to kick things off, and then we can dive into some more topics?
Sure, happy to. I mean, my background, it's a little bit varied. I have a master's degree in journalism that I got after 3 years in the Peace Corps, which was right after college. And then I moved to New York originally to play music, actually, and wound up getting involved in healthcare PR, which, if you know, healthcare PR is a very specific thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I did that for about 13 years in a couple of top 10 agencies. And while I was doing that, I worked on a couple of biotech products and I kind of got bitten by the bug and wound up. And I mean, I should say, my biggest claim to fame is having launched Cialis. And Cialis was about 7 years of my life.
Wow.
And after having done that, I really enjoyed working on the biotech side of things. So I kind of branched out, started looking into investor relations firms, worked at a fairly well-known firm for a little while and kind of learned the IR side of things. After having done that for a little bit, I went out and I started my own company, JQA Partners. And that was, I call that strategic communications, which is, PR, IR content development, and strategy, and then corporate communications.
Nice.
And then what I wound up doing from there was, just kind of working in biotech with smaller life sciences companies. And then shortly into doing that, I connected with the guys at Core IR. And Core and I wound up doing some work in parallel. They would throw me some work every once in a while. And so, eventually they became my largest client. And, and I'm their de facto head of communications, and, considered a full-time person at Core IR. And so, and from there, I still specialize a lot in life sciences, especially with Core, but, having worked with Core, I'm also a generalist in terms of, the communication strategy and content development.
You have worked with larger companies, you've worked with smaller companies. What would you say are the key differences in those communication strategies? So if you have like a multinational billion-dollar company versus maybe an up-and-coming startup, maybe out of Boston or something, I'm just throwing a city out there.
That's a really good question. The strategy ultimately is probably pretty similar.
Mm-hmm.
The strategy is you want to be clear. You want to make sure that you are giving your stakeholders, whoever they may be, the most useful information and doing it in a way that they can digest easily, quickly, and then act on.
Mm-hmm.
Where the differences come are twofold. One is in the kind of the manner in which those communications are created. When you're working with big pharma, when you're working with larger companies, you are dealing with many more people, many more cooks in the kitchen, and more levels and layers of oversight and review. So it's a slower process, and sometimes, agonizingly so, because, every company and their culture is different.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the way we would do something for Lilly is different than the way we would do it for Novartis, is different than the way we would do it for Pfizer. Whereas, In a smaller life sciences company, first of all, it's a lot faster. It's immediate. There are fewer stakeholders because, when you're dealing with larger companies, they are usually talking about a product that either they have developed to the point where they are talking about it outwardly, which means it's later stage, right? So it's not just in patients, but it's like moving closer toward the FDA approval point, right? And so you have more stakeholders. You have patients, you have prescribers, you have investigators, you have regulators. And, if it's a publicly traded company, you have two sets of regulators because you've got, the FDA and you've got the SEC. You've got investors, right? Whereas with, the smaller companies, generally they are a little earlier stage. So you're not so much looking to attract a prescriber or a patient at that point. You still have investors, very much so. There are different levels of investor, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a little bit. But, you have investors, you have regulators, and then, there are going to be some, scientists, but those scientists tend to be more on the investor side. They tend to be, kind of the institutional investors where the analyst is a PhD or an MD and is trying to communicate to their stakeholders about what's important about this little piece of science or this little piece of business that you're talking about. So the strategy is always clarity. And gosh, that was a long way around to get to clarity, right? The strategy is always clarity and transparency. And, my preference is brevity. Not always possible, but that's my preference. But then kind of the way toward getting to that is always a little bit different.
And you're talking about clarity. And so I do want to circle back about something you just said. You were talking about oversight when it goes into biotech companies. I feel like navigating the regulatory environment is not necessarily the easiest thing to do when you're a communicator because there's so many different things you can say, what you can't say. Some clients are a certain way about the way that they want to be perceived. I would love to know, how do you help your own clients communicate important FDA approvals or maybe clinical trial developments in a way that resonates with their own stakeholders, whether that's patients or doctors or potential partners and investors as well?
Well, clinical trial developments is far more common an occurrence than approvals, and especially nowadays. Some of it, I hate to say it, but some of it is just experience. Understanding what claims you can make, and those claims are usually based on things that have already been established. So when you're talking about science and you're talking about, you would never write anything in there that you would take as fact that you cannot verify with data, right? And that data generally needs to be peer reviewed. And if you're making a treatment claim, especially, the FDA will frown on that because the FDA is who tells you whether or not you can make a treatment claim. Right. You can make a data claim. You can say that these data show in this study that, right? But you can't say this drug cures cancer.
Right.
Right. So that's the FDA piece, right? And then the SEC piece is very similar because, you can only say, well, first of all, the important thing that you have to make sure that you do is full disclosure. So like you cannot have selective disclosure. And I'm going to say this at the outset, and I'm sure I'll repeat it a couple of times. I do not have a PhD or an MD. And so when I talk about anything science related, it is 100% based on my experience and having been doing this for as long as I have. Nor am I a finance person. I don't have a financial background. Again, I have experience in communicating to investors about content, but you don't want me to be the guy to write your 10K.
I totally get that.
I'm not a CFO. I'm not a financial person, right? So I just want to make sure that I'm very clear about that, so that my expertise it comes through in my experience, not in my credentials. Because it's really important that be understood. Now, I have wonderful, engaging conversations with MDs and PhDs. I have lots of wonderful, engaging conversations with JDs and MBAs, but I don't have any of those things. I have an MA in journalism. So to go back to what your question was, in terms of the SEC, again, you have to make sure that you are disclosing to everyone, to all stakeholders, and that your number one friend is legal review. So, in my experience, I got pretty adept at writing for lawyers because I was, when working in big pharma, I was writing for 5 lawyers at a time. Usually it's only 1 or 2 when you're in the biotech world or in the micro cap world or small cap world. So a lot of it is experience and kind of that give and take that comes from the internal stakeholders who are trained in knowing what you can and can't say. And then kind of knowing that there are some places where you can push the envelope a little bit. There are some places where you shouldn't push the envelope, and understanding the difference between a belief and a fact.
That is a good one. Jules, one thing that I do know about you is that you actually are really good with regard to crisis management. And and I know this is a topic that everybody that's on that, has a journalism background or is a communicator or somebody in PR, they're like, whoa, don't bring this up. But the thing is that you are, and in biotech and healthcare, crisis management can be more critical given patient outcomes and public safety, especially as we know coming out of COVID and what happened with the misinformation spread and all of that. I would love for you to share a scenario where proactive communication strategies maybe help defer a potential crisis for one of your clients.
That's a really tough question, because the truth of the matter is, in life sciences, crises happen completely out of people's control. I mean, there are things that people do that you can avert a crisis from.
Mm-hmm.
But, most crises, especially in the life sciences arena, happens because of something you couldn't control. A trial doesn't go as you expected. There's a massive sell-off, based on that. Or on something that you can't control. It could be algorithmic, right? So in terms of being able to avert crises, the best way to avert a crisis from a communications perspective is, number one, to make sure that everybody who is in a position of communications is on the same page. Everyone is speaking the same language. Everyone is saying the same thing the same way. Nobody is, as they say, kind of going off on their own, or going rogue and saying what they want to say that kind of goes outside of that messaging framework. So I can't tell you what crises were averted because they didn't come up. Right? Preparedness is always the way to avert crises in as much as one can. And again, that's a question of messaging. That's a question of making sure that everybody's goals are aligned. That's internal communications is key, making sure that the lawyers and the people who look at things from a regulatory perspective and the management, of any given company, as well as, all of the different stakeholders, whether they be vendors, whether they be investigators, whether they be investors, insiders, that everybody's on the same page and everybody's kind of going for the same goal. That's how you prevent a crisis, because then nobody is kind of going rogue. Everything else, you can't foresee it.
Right.
You know it could happen. I mean, we always know that, in a clinical trial, somebody could die. We always know that somebody could sell off a huge position and that could, cause some damage to the stock. And how are we going to deal with that? There are always bad actors out there, and those bad actors sometimes have to be responded about, but never to. That's legal job, right? That's right. The lawyer's job, is to respond to the bad actors directly, but to respond about the situation is the communicator's job. Mm-hmm. So I think that I know it doesn't directly answer your question, but that's good communications too, is to answer the question you want to answer.
No, I was going to just say that. Honestly, though, it's insightful. It's a good insight for us to know. I mean, though I know our listeners will definitely care about that part of it.
And I mean, again, I want to underscore the fact that, you can't prevent the crisis you don't know about.
100%. And you know what? I actually want to pivot to media engagement in particular, because you and I both know that executives and scientists, they struggle when it comes to media engagement unless they're being coached. I mean, some of them, of course, they have that special eye. I mean, I would say maybe 5% are able to go into a media room and be ready to just just go out and go into battle. But I want to know how you coach individuals or teams to effectively present their biotech story or maybe financial updates to news outlets, to analysts, or maybe even a large conference audience.
Well, again, that's the key to the success about, around that is to just, again, it's consistent messaging.
Mhm.
Everyone's saying the same thing the same way about, each topic.
Right.
And then, we all, at some point, I mean, I do it less and less now because, the exposure that I have to media, has reduced over the years just based on, kind of where my work has taken me and sort of the content generation and that kind of behind the scenes prep work that we're talking about. But, I had my years of doing media training and all of that as well. I did it for many, many years. And I still do it. And I still do it, with Core IR, and I do presentation training with Core IR, as well as, on the JQA side when it's appropriate. And, really the consistency of the message, the understanding who the audience is, right? There is a big difference between having a conversation with a trade journalist who writes for PhDs as the trade journalist or as the consumer or the generalist journalist who writes for investors, right? Or who writes especially, let's say, for retail investors, which are the investors that I tend to touch the most.
Huge.
A generalist audience is always more challenging when you're dealing with life sciences information because it's technical, right? And there are certain buzzwords that people know, if they're following these companies, they know things like statistical significance and, FDA clearance and things like that. But then when you start getting into, side effect profiles and percentages and, what's a good percentage of patients who had a complete response versus a partial response, all of those things, part of the preparation is really preparing these executives for who they're talking to so that, I know a tremendous number of MD PhDs who are CEOs. And most of them, when you kind of get them to the point where it's like, your retail audience needs to be able to understand you. And so you work very closely with them to, I don't want to say dumb it down because it's pejorative to begin with, but it's also not accurate, to simplify and clarify very technical information so that it can be meaningful to the audience. And everything is about who is your audience. That's why press releases, by the way, are tough, right? Because press releases are a much wider audience, right? And so you have to be able to have the PhD or MD or expert, mining, technology, whatever it is, the expert, care about what's in the press release just as much as the person who may be a very, the layperson who doesn't necessarily have the vocabulary of that particular vertical, right? And so writing for an audience, speaking for an audience, that goes with media, that goes with presentations, that goes with everything. And then finding that balance is the challenge.
I love that you're saying that. And I actually want to tap into something with regard to Core, because I know Core also does investor relations and you're more on the communication side. And I believe Scott, he was on the podcast recently and he was talking
I saw that.
And he was so great. I love it. We're going to actually talk about something that he said. He said mirroring the IR side and the PR side is becoming so much more important nowadays. And I want to know how you do it. So how do you align PR strategies with IR strategies to ensure that your companies present this consistent, compelling narrative to both markets or to all markets?
First of all, I have the distinct advantage of having done both.
I love it.
Right? I mean, like I started in PR and I became an IR person. It wasn't the other way around where an IR person was writing press releases for investors. I was writing press releases and I was doing messaging for everybody when I started, right? I was launching big pharma drugs that were designed for people to then go to their doctor and ask them about them, right? So it's incredibly important to marry them, and especially kind of in the smaller cap investor or the more retail investor context, because they are consumers, right? I mean, there are some, Core especially has a very specific philosophy on who they call a retail investor. And I like the way they do that. I agree with it. But then, you have your traders, and traders are not always going to be paying attention to a p value,
True.
in a press release or in a message track, right?
Good point.
Which is an indicator of statistical significance for those of you listening who don't know that. So you have to be able to show at a number of different levels why your message is important, and it's why there's never a single message, right? Because you have to be able to make sure that there is a narrative, not just a message, but a narrative that gets people to where you want to get them from all of the different backgrounds, that are there. So yeah, I couldn't agree with Scott more on that topic, because it's something that we have both worked, long and hard in our careers to try and achieve. I can't say perfect, but achieve, certainly.
I love that. And I do want to break this up a bit, because I do know one side project that you're recently launching, or you just recently launched, your pastrami. Your pastrami. I haven't had the chance to try it yet, but my colleague has, and I need to get her feedback in particular. I just love that you're doing this. I feel like, we work, and then you find something that is a passion project, and you're able to run with it, and people love it, and they want to support you on it. And I hear it's really good. So one, I just want to talk a little bit about what made you start something that's like a little bit more on the creative side now. Why now?
Well, first of all, Jessica, be fair. I've been doing creative stuff my whole life. As I said, I moved to New York to play music. I'm a songwriter. I've done that. You may or may not have seen me jam with Scott Gordon again.
I was gonna say, I didn't know.
Yeah,
I didn't know.
yeah. But the pastrami thing, I've always been a food person. When I moved to New York, I kind of developed a Katz's Deli habit.
I love that. Good.
And so, I live in San Diego now. I live in North County, San Diego, and it's good. Good pastrami's hard to find. Pastrami's easy to find, but good pastrami, and again, this is the guy for my master's degree. I wrote an article on the dying art of the New York deli, which has actually made a resurgence. But that kind of food, it's meaningful to me, and I like it. So when I moved out here, I missed it and went to YouTube and tried to figure out how to make it for myself, and kind of developed a recipe on my own. And over 10 years, got pretty good at it. And then people started saying, you should sell this stuff. So I did.
You've been doing it for 10 years?
I've been making pastrami for 10 years. I started the business in January.
Okay, then that would make more sense, because I was going to say this, it actually looks really good. So I was like, how do you go, if you just started it, that means that you've been perfecting your recipe for 10 years.
Oh, I've been working on it a long time.
Oh, yeah.
I give it as gifts. I donate it to certain charitable organizations. Like if they have a silent auction, there are a couple of organizations here that I donate pastrami to. To help them raise money and things like that. So, but that was all precursor to starting Pastrami Q.
I love that. You know what? We're going to put Pastrami Q in the show notes as well, in addition to Core and JQA, just so everybody is well aware that they can order.
I wish I had my website up, but the Instagram is there.
We'll put the Instagram in and how to order. We'll put it all in the notes. I feel like there's going to be people that do want to tap into that.
And we ship.
I love it. Okay, going back to, of course, our main topic here, between FDA rules, SEC guidelines, and other regulatory frameworks, biotech and healthcare companies face numerous compliance hurdles. How do you balance speed and agility in communication, which is so important in today's fast digital world, and the need to follow these strict regulations? It's not an easy thing.
Well, my superpower is ADHD.
Perfect. That actually probably makes it better then, in particular, because you're able to jump from one topic to the next topic. That's a superpower.
Very quickly, very easily. No, honestly, it takes practice. It just does. It's one of those things where when people need something quickly, over time you develop the ability to do it.
Right.
Right. I mean, I wish there were a formula I could give you. I don't know what it would be, except just continuing to do it and learning as much as you can from from the people you're working with, whether they be your client, whether they be your colleagues, whether they be your stakeholders. I mean, I really obsessed early on with talking to regulators or talking to regulatory experts and talking to lawyers so that I could understand why they were making changes on my documents that they were making so that I could learn how to make them better and how to make them better for them. That would then speed the process along. So it's really about engagement and knowing knowing all your stakeholders and just continue doing it. I wish there were a better, answer that I could, wave a wand and give you the secret. But, for me, it's probably the fact that I can do a lot of things at once.
I like it. That is that is the secret, and that is why sometimes people succeed or other people might fail. What are you seeing shaping the future of communications in these fields? So whether it's new technologies, digital, and when I say these fields, I mean within the biotech, pharmaceutical, maybe medtech, diagnostic industries. Whether it's new technologies, digital platforms, or changes within public perception, what do you think are going to be the trends shaping the future?
I'm going to go back to my disclaimer of not having an MD or a PhD.
Mm-hmm.
So for me to say what I think the trends are in terms of where medicine is going, I don't know the answer to that. I mean, you know, immuno-oncology remains very hot. Gene therapy is making a comeback. People are trying to test the limits of the GLP-1 drugs, to see how many different indications they can staple onto them, to see if they work. So like from a medical perspective, it's like, okay, here's some of that. I think there are some trends that I would like to see go away. I think there are also some trends that we're starting to see emerge with regard to, and AI is probably the thing you were waiting to hear me say. AI has been used in life sciences for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
It's been used for target identification for more than 20 years. But now people are finding new ways to use AI, and they're using them in really fascinating ways, to sort of help that personalized medicine that everybody is, got the goal of. AI has a way to get us there, and I'm anxious to see how it nets out. I wish people would rely less on AI from a communications perspective.
Right.
You didn't ask me this, but I wanted to tell you anyway, because one of the things, I was having a conversation with somebody who was dealing with a crisis, actually, and they were asking me about AI and writing and things like that. And, the thing about AI is a great tool for writers, but a terrible writing tool. If you use AI as your thing that you use to write, writing is always going to be something that requires instinct and empathy and knowledge. And no matter how far that goes, empathy and certainly strategy, those are human constructs, right? But AI is great when you need to make your writing better. You need a new word. You need to reduce your prose by a page. You need something to kind of help your brain do what it does well. AI is great for that.
Exactly.
It's a good tool for writers, but it's not a good writing tool.
Love that. I think we're gonna quote that from you and put that everywhere, by the way, because I agree.
I hope you will.
I agree with you.
I was really proud to sort of come up with that particular thing. But I really do think it's true. So I mean, I think that those are all trends. I think everyone is talking about AI, and AI is it's exciting. Quantum computing, it's exciting.
Big time.
I'll be interested to see how it manifests, both within the industries that I work in and in the communication side of things. Certainly computing is a fantastic research tool, whether you're doing medical research or just trying to learn about whatever it is you're writing about. So I do think that those are some of the trends that I'm kind of seeing. I hope that answered your question.
It did, and more, by the way, and more. So that was perfect.
Threw too much at you. I'm sorry.
No, it was perfect. It was perfect. And before we wrap up, I ask everybody on the podcast this question. What's one piece of advice you would give to somebody that's looking to excel in your industry? So in our case, maybe strategic communications, but within high stakes arenas like healthcare, biotech, finance, and other industries that you work in.
What's the one piece of advice?
One piece of advice, whether you want it to be for maybe an entrepreneur or somebody that's trying to.
I have never been known to give one piece of advice about any. So this is tough. Don't be afraid to make mistakes because you're gonna. Mistakes are the best way for us to learn. As you're getting started, your mistakes are lower stakes, right? And so, we all say dumb things. I'm sure I've done that at least 4 times over the course of this conversation. We all say dumb things. We all get our facts wrong sometimes. We all trip over our own grammar. We all, but in doing so, it's in the mistakes that we refine ourselves, both as a professional, as a human being. And I want to change my answer because I just said the word human being. Never lose track of your humanity,
I love that.
which I guess is part of the making of mistakes. But the human element is really important as well. We've all been in jobs where there is dehumanizing activity.
Yep.
We're all in this together, whether we know it or not, And so the humanity of it all is just as important as the money, as the biology, as the, as the stuff of the business. We're all walking in the same planet and learning how to deal with each other with compassion and with dignity and with helping, with the best of intentions. Our intentionality is important, and so the humanity of it, I think, is also just really, really important.
I think that is the most perfect way to close out the podcast today. Jules, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me. This was fun.
It was perfect. And I feel like I'm going to have you come back on again because every time you gave me a piece of advice or a little nugget that I could possibly use in my own work that I do, I thought of another question to ask you. So I might need to have you back on very soon.
I would love to come back. It's always a pleasure talking to you, as you know.
Thank you. Thank you. And for our listeners who want to learn more about Jules and now Pastrami Q as well, please sure to check out the links in our show notes. And as always, thank you for joining Communicating Capital.